Alright, so in this section we talk about the product and quotient rule. The product rule says that if you got two functions that are multiplied together and you want to take the derivative of that, it's the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. Or if you got f times g and you're taking the derivative, or fg prime, it's fg prime plus g f prime. Alright, so if you got x e to the x and you want to take the derivative, you take the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. Well, the derivative of the second is just itself. The derivative of x is just 1, and so you get this guy here. Now if you take the derivative of this guy, again, you've got product rule for this first one. First derivative of the second plus the second derivative of the first. And the second one isn't a product rule, it's just one term. When you take the derivative, you get this, and you can factor out e to the x, and so you end up simplifying down to here. Now if you take the derivative of that again, you end up getting even more e to the x's. And so what happens is, as you take successive derivatives of this function, you get x plus 1 e to the x plus 2 e to the x plus 3 e to the x plus 4 e to the x, and so the nth derivative for this unusual function is x plus n e to the x. For this one, there's two different ways you can do this one. One, you can use the product rule, so you take the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. Okay, first is left alone. Derivative of this, your a is a constant, it goes away. bt is just b. The second part, that stays the way it is, and this is just the derivative of square root. We know that's 1/2 t to the minus 1/2, which reduces and simplifies, and you can write it as one big fraction if you want. The other way you can do the exact same problem is to multiply each part by t, square root of t, and you get these two terms, and then you can just do the power rule that we learned in the last section. You get the same answer either way. Now here they ask you to find f prime of 4, and they give you this here. So you want to take the derivative of this, so it's the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. Well, the derivative of g is just g prime. The derivative of the square root we know is 1/2 x to the minus 1/2. Nothing unusual there. Okay, and you can simplify it a little bit if you want. Now you plug in 4 for x, and you get all of this. And they tell you what this guy is up here, tell you what this guy is up there, and it allows you to simplify the whole thing down. Now here's the other rule, which is the difference quotient. If you're taking the derivative of a fraction, it's the bottom times the derivative of the top minus the top times the derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared, which is f over g prime is g f prime minus f g prime over g squared. Another way you can think about it is if you think of the top as high and the bottom as ho, you've got ho d high minus high d ho over ho ho. And so you got the bottom times derivative of the top minus top derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. It's just kind of a catchy way to sometimes help you to remember the quotient rule. Alright, so you got these two guys, you're taking the derivative, so it's the bottom derivative of the top minus the top derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And you take the derivative of each one, you multiply everything out, and you get your answer. Okay, this one, it's the bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And again, you take the derivative of each one and simplify it out as you would before. Alright, so now here's the many different differentiation formulas that we know so far. We know the derivative of a constant is 0. We know the power rule. We know e to the x's derivative is e to the x. Constant times the derivative is just the derivative times the constant. And adding or subtracting, it's each one's individual derivative. And we just learned the product and the quotient rule. Alright, so let's look at some problems here. This first one, they give you 3e to the x square root of x, or 3e to the x to the 1/2. So you can consider 3e to the x as your first function, f, and this one as your g, so it's the first derivative of the second plus the second derivative of the first. And each one, you get your derivative, and then a matter of just simplifying it from there on out. Here, this one, you can say, you can write each one as y to the negative 2 and y to the negative 4, and then you can expand everything out, and then you can just do the power rule here. and you get your answer. Number 3, difference quotient, the quotient rule for sure. Bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And each one of these derivatives gives you this, and then you expand everything out. Quotient rule again. Bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And again, you take the derivative, simplify it out, things cancel, and there you go. On this one, it might be good to multiply this guy out, at least for now. And now it's the bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And when you take your derivatives, you get a bunch of different answers there. On this one, it's product rule. It's the first guy times derivative of the second plus the second guy times derivative of the first. Well, the derivative of the second guy here is just 1 and CE to the W. Derivative of that is 3 halves W to the 1 half. And then everything else reduces the way it does. Quotient rule, bottom, derivative of the top minus the top, derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And you take your derivatives of each one. Bunch of stuff reduces. You can do some factoring and finally figure out what you got here. This one they ask you to find the first and second derivative. So first derivative is first guy derivative of the second plus the second guy derivative of the first, and you get this. And now we do the product rule twice with each one of these guys. This one we do x to the 7th derivative of e to the x plus e to the x, the derivative of x to the 7th. And here we do 7x to the 6th times derivative of e to the x plus e to the x times derivative of the first guy. And you can factor out common terms and make it simpler if you want. First derivative, we're doing the product rule. First derivative of the second plus the second derivative of the first. And they factor out e to the x. And now to take the second derivative, you can think of it as this is your first, this is your second. So first guy derivative of the second plus the second derivative of the first. So first derivative of the second is 7 halves, take away 1 from the exponent. 5 halves, take away 1 from the exponent. And this other part is just the second guy untouched with the derivative of the first guy, which doesn't change. And then they factored out e to the x and combined like terms. Alright, quotient rule on this one. Bottom derivative of the top minus the top derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And they do the quotient rule a second time for the second derivative. They take the bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. Remember the bottom was 7 plus 8x squared, so when you square that you get to the 4th. And a bunch of stuff cancels and you end up with this guy here. On this one, it's bottom times derivative of the top minus the top times derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. Multiply everything out and you get your answer there. And they simplified it. Now they ask you to find the equation of tangent line at x equals 1, so you plug in 1 here and you get 2/3. Now you know your slope, and you can plug in the 1 point you know to find your equation of a line. Here the derivative of this fraction is the bottom times the derivative of the top minus the top times the derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. And they find the tangent line there. You got 7x and e to the x, so first guy times derivative of the second plus the second guy derivative of the first. And it gives you that guy there. And when you plug in 0, you get your slope. And there you go. And it looks like they're also wanting to find the normal line, which has a negative reciprocal slope of the original tangent line slope. So minus 1/7 versus positive 7. On this one, they give you, they ask you to find the first derivative of f of 5, g of 5. So you take f of 5 times g prime of 5 plus g of 5 f prime of 5. And you got all 4 of those numbers. You can plug them in, you get your answer. Then f of 5 over g of 5 derivative, you get the bottom, derivative of the top, minus top, derivative of the bottom, over the bottom squared. And again, plug in all the numbers you know. And same thing with just g on the top and f on the bottom. It's the same concept, it's just a slightly different answer. Here they ask you to take the derivative of this, and derivative of 4f of x is just 4f prime, and 2g is 2g prime, and they want you to analyze it at 2. And so you get these guys here, and from above you can fill in the blanks. They gave you this guy and they ask you to find the derivative, so it's the first guy derivative of the second plus the second guy derivative of the first, and they want to plug in at 2, so you plug in all these different values at 2. And then for h, it's f over g, so it's the bottom derivative of the top minus the top derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared, and it's all at 2, and so you plug in your values there. Now here, again, quotient rule, so it's the bottom derivative of the top minus the top derivative of the bottom. Derivative of 1 is 0, but derivative of f is f prime, all over the bottom squared. And you plug in all the numbers you know, and you get your answer there. F is e to the x g of x, so what's f prime? F prime is the first guy times the derivative of the second, plus the second guy times the derivative of the first. And they ask you to plug in a 0 for x, and you get all these values here. Alright, so if u equals f of g and f equals f over g, what's u prime? Well, it's f g prime plus g f prime, and you plug in a 1, and you get all these different values here that they give you. V, it's the bottom derivative of the top minus top derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared, which is exactly what we got here. And you plug in your answers, and you get the answer you get.